I'm not going to eat those damn things. And, what are you going to do? Peppermint in here.
Okay, you and Claude and John ought to sit in the same row here.
You didn't have the Italian. You got John right in the middle.
It's okay, I'll talk like this.
Some people, it affects them another way, too.
Water doesn't take that.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, it's 5:30. I will call the meeting to order. The study session for December 11th, 2017. And the focus group for tonight is Public Works and Community Development discussion items. And so we will start with roll call.
Deputy Mayor Wells.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
She's here.
Okay. Councilmember Wagner.
I'm sorry, you caught me with a mouthful of candy. Here.
Before we get started, which I'm going to add at the very end under other discussion items, and I'd like you to be thinking about it in the interim, is if we want to have a study session on December 26th. And the other item is the transition to new deputy mayor. So please add those, and we will probably look at those in another 4 hours. So with that, are there any announcements, reports, or presentations?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Then we are going to move into the Public Works and Community Development discussion items, and I'll turn the meeting over to Rich, and I will try not to interrupt him.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All right, we're going to start with digital parity. And I think the main thing we're trying to do here, Paul, is kind of get a feeling for where we're going rather than where we're at right now, isn't it?
Yes, sir. That is the focus of this conversation. Paul Haugen, Director of Innovation and Technology for the City of Auburn. Happy to speak with you today. Special thanks to CDPW for letting me go first. I think that was a remarkable and marvelous privilege you gave me, so thank you very much. This is our update for digital parity. We have a single subject tonight. We're not going to spend time going over what we have done. This is focusing on our goals for 2018 and beyond. The item we never really got to as we started to get our arms wrapped around this is what is council looking for in terms of coverage? Is this going to be an 80% of students? Is this going to be 80% of the city? And I provided you an update and a briefing sheet giving you some baseline numbers to help you get your arms wrapped around what this kind of a project is going to entail cost-wise. I think I made it abundantly clear, and I hope that we continue to keep in mind that this has a budget impact over the coming years. So tonight, it's a discussion about our coverage goals and an awareness of our budget impacts, and hopefully we can revisit this come the first quarter of the year so we can wrap this into our budget discussions if you desire. This is a short presentation. I actually have a copy here for you to go over. And to follow along.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Very brief recap. 2016-17, we were busy. You all know we finished our proof of concept, made some major additions to infrastructure to improve the parts of the city. For 2018, we have our project locations identified. And as you are aware, we are budgeted some money in 2018 to proceed with this. Where we're at now. We started out with our goals of providing 24/7 broadband access to low-income students to help bridge the education gap. And that's been our focus all along. We've shown the maps on what our projected coverage is. An interesting number I think we need to keep in mind, if we hit our 80% of low-income student coverage, that actually means we've also covered over half of the city. We hit 54% of the city. So that's an interesting number. That means we're very close to providing the true digital connection for the city of Auburn. Budget considerations, our best estimates here, and these are estimates based on our experience. This is not paying a consultant tens of thousands of dollars to go figure this out. This is based on what we know from our experience. We come in at $2.7 million to cover 80% of our low-income students. If we increase that number to 80% of the city, it jumps up to a little over $6 million. Time considerations, 5 to 10 years. The reason I put that in there is if council decides to move forward with this and continue this as a goal, we can, to lower the impact on budget, make this a 5-year, a 6-year, a 7-year, an 8-year, a 9-year, a 10-year project, which lowers our impact on budget but still allows us to keep on track to reach your goal of providing broadband access. The one thing I want to make abundantly clear here, in the technology world, we are now starting to reap the benefits of cost efficiencies, because we've already established partnerships with companies that have allowed us to continue to build out our infrastructure at zero to little cost for the city. We expect to continue that. That will have an impact on the costs by lowering them. There are new technologies under development that will also impact our costs by lowering it. So this is the one project where I can stand up here and pretty much guarantee you these numbers will go down. How much, we don't know. And I'm not gonna bet the farm on it, but I can tell you we're starting to see some cost efficiencies take place. So with that, what are our goals? These are the 4 questions I'd like you to take a look at. Is it 80% of low-income students? Is it 80% of residents? What can we afford? And what should our project time frame be? These are questions that will all be addressed during the 2019-2020 budget discussions, which will be starting next year. With that, I'm going to leave it up to you and answer any questions.
Paul, do we have any way of measuring the usage by the residents and the people?
We do right now. We average about, but we haven't split it down by students using it versus the public using it. Okay, right now we average about 3,000 residents a day that are on Access Auburn. Okay, we've had discussions with the school system that when we reach a certain tipping point, I guess you could say, by having a number of schools lit up, as we would transfer over the broadband for the low-income students to Auburn schools. There's a specific reason for that. This is their educational content that they want to spend out there. We want to provide them the opportunity to do that. They also pay 10% of what we pay for broadband access. So it would be much more cost efficient for the school system to do that. Okay. At that point in time, I think we would be able to get a much firmer number of the number of students that are actually being impacted.
That was my question as well, if you had data already start coming in on the percentage of the low-income students using it. And then my other question is, from what border to what border are we facilitating the Wi-Fi?
Well, that's the question that I'm hoping you guys can discuss and come up with a conclusion on. Is it 80% of the city?
What are we using right now?
I'm sorry.
What are we using right now?
We're
where
using
are
the borders of Auburn. We have wireless access in small spots from the north border to the south border. Okay.
Paul, can you tell the difference between cell phone use and computer use?
We can. It's labor intensive to do that. We actually have to drive a neighborhood, and we have to actually track how many wireless networks we pick up. It doesn't allow us to differentiate between a home network and a cellular network. We need some much more expensive equipment to do that. But we can tell how many local, what we might call a personal area network at a house. We can count those.
Can we save any money if we don't service cell phones?
That's a hard question to answer because cell phones are so mobile. I wish there was a way we could actually identify students that have cell phones or families that have cell phones that actually have the service plan that allows them to use it as a hotspot so that they can share that connection with the computer, like the Chromebooks that the school system is putting in. We just don't have the technology to grab that information yet.
Claude?
So Paul, on page 4 of 138, you give us a little breakdown of the cost.
Yeah.
Over that period of time. So we have Mothershoot, South Auburn, North Auburn, legal phase, and the 80% coverage. For each of those 4 areas, can you give us a breakdown of what the coverage, I know in what order we are, but what the coverage is now, and how soon it takes us to get to a point where 80% would be covered in all those 4 areas?
The way we have our proposed project plan is it's based on those geographical areas in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, like the Muckleshoot plan, which by the way is not moving off of the city of Auburn into the reservation. It's the reservation part that's in the city of Auburn. If that was year 1, it would take 1 year to do that. Okay, the next year would be the next one, maybe South Auburn, and we would then continue to move forward. You know, the simple answer to this, which I'm not dumping on you because I don't think it's feasible, is if y'all wrote us a check for $3 million, we'd go get it done. Okay, that's not what we're asking for. Okay, this is something we're going to have to plan out and do in phases, and part of what that determination is given to us by the city of Auburn by what their target schools are, what their high-risk schools are, and that's what we're planning for 2018.
Lou?
I'm glad to hear you speak to the concept of we're trying to hit target schools. As I talk to some of the citizens out there, we are very, very friendly and inviting to our low-income students. We really want to support their academic endeavors and all of that. But just giving free broadband to everyone, I think some people feel that that might be too much. But that's why we need to put the caveat. This isn't so they get Netflix and this, and I think we need to keep saying that and keep saying that, because people get the picture in their mind that, you know, the kids are doing their homework at 2 in the morning after they got done with Game of Thrones and whatever else they watch for the 18th time.
That is a good point. And right now, Access Auburn, we do block, since Access Auburn was not designed to deliver entertainment. It was designed to deliver a service to the people of Auburn and to the visitors of Auburn. So they can do their email, they can do their web searches, they can do their shopping. We actually block Netflix and those kinds of entertainment channels. It's not designed for movies. So that is a good point.
That's good to know.
You mentioned partners on page 6. Who are the current partners, and are they applying funding?
The partnerships,
Or would they apply funding?
the partners we work with right now are Zayo, which is a fiber optic installation company, Wave Broadband, and Verizon. We were working on a similar partnership with CenturyLink, and then they had a change in their business direction, so they just backed off from everything for a while. We've had the conversation with Comcast. It has been a long conversation. We have more talks to discuss. Comcast actually wants to, and I'm sorry I'm taking a little left turn here, Councilman Pelosi, I'll come back to your question. Xfinity is actually starting to push a wireless program called Xfinity Wireless that Comcast wants to talk to us about whether that has any impact on our plan, if that can help assist that. It is a cost plan, but they want to make sure that the cost is reasonable. So that's something we're going to add into it. But these are the partners we're working with: Zayo, Wave Broadband, and Verizon. And they are not applying funding, nor are we applying funding to this type of an agreement. It's an agreement based on wherever you're going, we'd like to know in case we can go with you, and wherever we're going, we want to share the same opportunity with you, and it has worked out incredibly well. And again, I have to reference CDPW for their assistance on this, and also the legal team for working out the details of this.
I talked to Terry Davis the other week or so ago, just to kind of double check what you're saying. He says, as far as he knows, you guys are keeping it good time. John?
I think it's important that we keep in mind the original purpose of this goal was to benefit low-income students. And it would be my personal preference that we continue with this first bullet point of 80% of low-income students, understanding that we never will reach 100% of low-income students. But 80% is a good solid B.
And Paul's comment that 80% then gets 54% of the city is an encouraging number.
Mm-hmm. And as the prices come down, we may want to add another goal of wireless broadband throughout the city. But for this goal, let's keep it with the original purpose to benefit low-income students that don't have broadband access in the home and do a passable effort at it.
Anybody have a comment? Yeah, Bill.
So, another question I have, Paul.
Yes, sir.
What other cities our size have embarked on this venture that you know of?
If you'd asked me that question earlier this morning, I could have gotten you an entire list of those cities. Off the top of my head, cities our size, I would have to dig that information out of my files and send it to you. I am highly familiar with some of the larger installations, Silicon Valley, San Jose, Philadelphia. I think we're all aware of the Seattle attempt to figure out what it would cost. But I will have to dig that information up and give it to you.
If you could send that to all of us, I
Happy to do
appreciate
so.
it.
How does it tie in with the ring around the lake?
For us, it provides a connection to much more cost-effective broadband access, which we are in the process of working out right now. When the ring around the lake, and I'm sorry I said that. I'm used to calling this to ring of fiber, and that's my Johnny Cash reference right there. So ring around the lake, I'll call it that for purposes of this discussion. When it went live in February, Auburn was actually the first municipality to jump on board and allowed us to fire up our business continuity center up north in Tukwila. It also is now allowing us to move into dealing with tier 1 service providers. And our best estimates right now, when we're still trying to get our arms wrapped around this, we spend approximately $100,000 a year for circuits. Now that is telephone circuits, network circuits, INET circuits for law enforcement. We have the opportunity to cut that to about $25,000 once we get this done. So there's a huge cost savings for us. The number one for us, though, is lowering the cost of our broadband so that our services to the city and to Access Auburn are actually dropped.
Anybody else have comments in the line of what John was mentioning about which of these columns looks good to you? Bill?
Have you, in looking at this breakdown, have you thought of anything less than 80%?
I have not. That's why I brought this question to you guys. 80% was a number that was floated here several months ago. It's a good starting point for the discussion.
The reason I said that was I'm a little skeptical of the dollars we're looking at when we have homelessness befronting us, road maintenance, preservation, all of this. The council's going to have to make some big, heavy decisions in going with taking care of the internet for the low-income folks in our town. That's taking, now, I haven't seen any funding area that you're looking at. But that's my concern. we have all these other things over our head. We need to take care of our citizens. And do we want to, this is like cream on the cake, the way I look at it, because we've got other huge needs in our city. How does this affect our downtown economics? How do you think it would affect our downtown economics? Is it going to be, will it bring, from what we already have in place, embodied in our city core here, is any of this going to help us develop our downtown better?
You asked two questions there. I'm going to deal with one as the IT director for the city of Auburn. I'm going to deal with the second one as Paul Haugen, who's both of my parents were educators. Okay, the first one. This program moves us closer to being able to call Auburn a connected city. We already have all of our government offices hooked up. We are now talking about providing services to the citizens. As we start to get our arms wrapped around smarter cities, connected cities, Internet of Things, these are all looming issues on the horizon that we are going to have to face at some point in time. This helps position Auburn as a connected city. I think, and I'm going to defer to our economic development folks to give you a confirmed answer on this, I think that raises the profile of Auburn to a point where it would help in the economic development arena. I'm not talking about taking this project and hooking up companies. It's not the intent. This intent was focused on low-income students. Okay? But that's my answer to your first question, or to your second question. Your first question, we have homelessness, we have poverty, we have major systemic issues to deal with. One of the reasons this idea came to the forefront, poverty, if it is addressed at a young age, we have a much better chance of changing that culture, if you want to call it that. And as we were discussing this, starting at a young age, where Auburn Schools is starting also with putting Chromebooks in the hands of students and getting them into the digital age, gives us the opportunity to attack those items, homelessness, poverty, better paying middle-class jobs, I think starts by giving people opportunity. That's my answer as Paul Haugen, who happens to have two teachers for parents, okay? So, and I'm going to leave it right there.
Thanks, Paul.
I have some of the same concerns as Councilmember Pelosa, that we need to look at the other areas that are really our primary responsibilities. But this is an avenue for us to be proactive and not always reactive to what we're left with. So I think it's a balancing act, but what we invest in our kids, and most of our kids and families end up staying here, is going to benefit us. But I want to look at this in relationship to everyone else. But it's nice to see us not just doing everything reactive. Yeah.
First thing I did when Paul started his presentation is I underlined what we can afford. That's primary. We really, all pressing issues we're going to need to address in this next budget season. But I'm reminded of my time at the Housing Authority when we looked at the educational aspect of low-income students. The promise used to be made at that time was that if you invested a child between kindergarten and third grade and make those investments significant, the chances of that child succeeding further in education is almost a given, because you're really putting your money in the beginning phases of childhood development. And even when I was at the Housing Authority, we participated in a lot of costly programs, if you will, that would work with the school districts to do that exact same thing. So it is an investment. And I think our question is what is the investment? And the time frame for the investment is kind of the major question I'm looking at.
Good.
I jumped to the last bullet point. What should our project time frame be? Our citizens advised us through their support of the Auburn School District's technology levy. See, that passed in what, 2014, 2015? And how many years does that run? Do you remember? I think it was a 10. I think it was a 10-year levy. That'd take us out through 2024. This is just off the top of my head. I have done no research on it. But it seems like we could partner. We've kind of said we would support the school district, and the citizens have said they were supporting it with their pocketbooks, that we should try and match the time frame. So if that was the case, would take us out to 2024. That would be 6 more years. So on your year program, 6 years takes us out. And a cost per year of $450,000.
As you take this home and you struggle with this, because I know it's going to be a struggle. Believe me, I know it's going to be. Keep this in mind. As I said earlier, we fully expect the costs on these projects to drop over the coming years. We fully expect that. I would love to be able to get this project done because I believe in it. Okay, I think you all set the right tone. I think you had the right vision when you came up with this, and you said we're going to make it one of our goals. But I am not averse to making this a 7, 8, 9, 10-year project simply so we can have a more reasonable impact on budget and allow us to start to take advantage of the costs and the cost savings. Okay, I am not averse to a 5-year project or a 6-year project. Similar to, I think, what CDPW is dealing with on their streets issue. We do have limited resources on staff. Being able to manage this size of a project in a compressed time frame could be a challenge for us. Being able to stretch that out a little bit means I'm not going to come back to you and go, by the way, I need another staff person to handle this. I don't want to do that. I'd like to be able to do this within the resources we've got. I think that's the magic of making this happen. So I'm just leaving that to you to chew on as you start to discuss this.
You know, I have to agree with Mr. Pelosa. With all of my council members, we were just talking about that as we were eating, about us having to tighten our belts, you know, but we did start this out with supporting the lower income students so they can get caught up with all the other students, you know, and they're doing their work and stuff. So I like what we have here, and it's great that you gave us a little bit of a breakdown. But it is a lot to think about right now, and I don't want it to go more than 8 years myself, you know, and as you keep saying that it's going to come down. So that's something that we would like, I know I would like to see how it's going to come down.
As we move forward with this, I would imagine I will continue to give you your quarterly updates, and that will be, if we ever come up to that point of having those cost savings, believe me, I will be standing up here going like this.
The other thing that we haven't mentioned here is we're likely to lose our $2 million of SST mitigation. And so you guys have kind of been talking about, well, what are we not going to do like homeless? We're going to probably have $2 million less in about a year. Nancy?
Just to follow up, the Auburn School District Technology Capital Projects Levy was in 2014, and it's a 6-year collection starting in 2015 to 2020.
I withdraw my earlier comments then. We can't do it in that fast of a time, but we can keep chipping away at it. And my apologies, I spoke without, out of order.
Any other specifics, like John, said 7 years and only the low-income students? Any other people that want to chime in on whether they think that's the right recommendation?
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. I think hitting 80% of our local population, and like you said, brings 54% of the city on board, but I think we really need to target that 80% and keep our focus there, depending upon what our investment is.
So how will this come forward, Paul? Just as part of the budget discussion?
It'll be part of the budget discussions.
Okay.
I would imagine at the mayor's request, we will probably talk about this during our budget retreat. I would imagine we'll be talking about it with council as we continue to move forward and start to develop that 1920 budget.
I think it might be useful to pass a resolution too, since this is a long-term thing. And say, our goal, resolution is like a goal, is to finish in X years and cover 80% of the students. And then we all know where we're going.
Yes, sir.
Bill?
I would like to see less than 80%, at least as an option, like maybe 50.
I can run those numbers for you and send them out to everybody to
Yeah.
add to the conversation.
Just so we have something to look at.
You bet.
Largo?
If you do provide us with those options, I think it would be very helpful for us if you reported by school the free and reduced lunch rate.
We can do that too.
Because many of our schools are at 85%, 95%, yeah. And some of them, very few of them are at 50%, just so we can get a feel, and we can also then see how the school district is really targeting.
And those are the core numbers that were used to develop their high value schools. And they provided those to us. I'm happy to share those.
Bill?
Would this be something that would fit into surveying the citizenship in the city?
Explain more what you mean.
Well, let's ask the citizens.
Largo?
Well, we kind of already did that, as John alluded to, in that the citizens have approved the building of 6 and then 2 new schools, a technology bond or levy, and
Well, where I was getting at,
Yeah.
Largo, we've got the bonds, we got the technical bond out there, we got 2 huge bonds still out there. And maybe they feel different now. I mean, their pocketbook has been hit hard. And, just
John?
It gives me great pride when some of our grade schools that have the highest free and reduced lunch student ratios outperform the grade schools of Bellevue. To me, that speaks very highly of what the future for Auburn is going to be. So if we're going to be satisfied with a non-passing grade, 50%, that's kind of throwing aside how well our schools are performing. But they perform well not just because of the school district, but because of the attitude of our citizens and the support of our citizens, because the attitude and support of Green River College, pardon me, and the support of this council. We're looking to the future. I caution all of us not to look at the next election cycle, but really to start thinking generationally. It's the next generation that we should be more concerned about, should be most concerned about. That's it.
I feel comfortable with the 80%. I think that it's also important if you gather some data for us on free and reduced lunch rate for each schools. Also check on their mobility. Some of our schools, like Dick Scobie, will have 100% mobility. So what you start with in your classroom at the beginning of the year would technically or statistically be a total different group of kids at the end. And so that's why it's not I think that the 80% is really kind of appropriate. But it would be interesting for us to see what that mobility rate is, and the school district has that.
I will pose the question to them.
Well, we're double the 15 minutes we had allotted to this, so I think we probably ought to wind it down. I guess, you know, there's no more action now until budget time, but if somebody wants to make recommendations to the mayor of what the budget proposal might be, certainly do that. I'll throw in my 2 cents. I agree that 80% is the right goal, and that stretching it out for at least 7 years is reasonable. Okay, next item. Thank you, Paul.
Bet.
Centers designation overview. This is the Puget Sound Regional Council's centers designation, and they're changing it all around. And while it doesn't actually create points when you go to get a transportation project done, it does open up different things you are eligible to apply for if you are a certain kind of center. So we're trying to just give you a teaser tonight. Thanks for being here, though, Brian. I think that helps from Sound Cities Association. And so go ahead. Do you, Jeff? Are you leading this?
Sure, I'll kick things off, and I'll, just for the record, Jeff Tate, Assistant Director of Community Development.
Ingrid Gaub, Assistant Director of Engineering, City Engineer.
And Brian Perry, Senior Policy Analyst with Sound Cities Association.
So as Councilmember Wagner indicated, really what's been provided in your packet tonight is just a real brief introduction and reminder. I assume it's new for some, reminder for others, but related to centers designation. And that term, centers designation or regional centers, has been in place and utilized in regional planning efforts for the last 30 years or so. And in the memorandum, what we've described is essentially the current framework, how that's set up, and that there's 2 types of regional centers. There's regional growth centers, and there's regional manufacturing industrial centers. In the city of Auburn, we have 1 regional growth center, and that's really the downtown area. Really lines up pretty consistent with the downtown urban center zone. And we've had that designation in place for a number of years. And associated with that is an adopted downtown plan. And that's one of the important components for eligibility for a regional center's designation, is to have a planning document that establishes policy for that area. Establishes policy, establishes growth targets and objectives, things of that nature. The other type of center is the Regional Manufacturing Industrial Center. Auburn does not have one of these center designations. They commonly refer to them called MIX, which is the acronym, Manufacturing Industrial Center. And I've included a little bit of language taken from Puget Sound Regional Council's webpage on what those 2 center designations, how they're defined by PSRC. They're also within the memo describe a little bit about what it means to be a designated center, and a lot of that comes down to work that Ingrid's better suited to speak to, but how we pursue grant funding for different types of projects that are either within the center or are directly serving the center. I've provided a map of what today's existing regional growth centers and manufacturing industrial centers looks like throughout the region, and what the profile looks like for Auburn's center designation. As Councilmember Wagner indicated, PSRC is going through a process right now to evaluate the criteria for designation of a center, redesignation of existing centers, and really what the metrics are and the targets are for what center designation means and what we should be striving for within a center in terms of how we fit into the regional framework of planning. That's a basic overview. I want to leave opportunity for Ingrid and Brian to be able to add anything to that before kicking it out for questions.
No, I think you did a great job doing an overview. For transportation side, the centers really feed into how we go about getting grant funds for projects. As Jeff said, really needs to be either serving a center or within a center, so having a center designation certainly helps us in getting those points so that we can score as best as we can on those grant applications. So.
It's Brian.
I would just add in a little bit of the kind of why now that project updates some of the criteria on the centers. I think that, as was mentioned, the center's been around as a concept and organizing regional growth for 30-some years, but the standards for each of those that came in, when they came in, they're all very different. And so we have some centers that are very small and not growing very much. We have others that are very large, very robust. Yours, I think, is one of the faster growing ones in the region. So it's kind of bringing everybody online to market system standards across the region.
I think the two questions we're going to have to answer is, do we want our regional growth center to expand from its current size, and do we want to have a manufacturing industrial center? And those are the two questions I see that are here. And I'm not sure what the timing is when we have to make that request, if we're going to make either of them. Do you know, Brian?
So they've talked, in the current draft proposal, they've talked about having a very brief window for applications for new centers that would be open just next year if they were to do it, and then align it with periodic updates to the regional growth strategy after that. So I think they were looking at maybe every 5 years or so.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard, is probably would, maybe 4 or 5 years, you get a chance to answer those two questions. So I think we do have to make up our mind, early next year, whether those are questions we want to ask.
And I think that one thing that would be good to feed that discussion would be to really understand what it means to obtain designation and what you have to do at a local level in order to obtain or qualify for that, because ultimately PSRC would evaluate that proposal. And frankly, there's conditions attached to that kind of designation. So council would really want to walk through what that means, what the pros and the cons are. Clearly it makes you, or gives you some ability to add some points into grant applications and make you perhaps have a stronger standing for being eligible for funding. But there are things that the city would have to do in terms of obtaining that designation and then keeping the designation and striving for those targets.
And that's what we are aiming the larger presentation, this teaser, is to try to dig into those kind of things. Okay, we ask for it, what do we sign up for? So is there a time we ought to aim for when that larger discussion takes place?
I don't believe that they have finalized the schedule for approving the update to the framework. I would not expect that until sometime probably early next year. Once you actually have that update, then I think we would have a better understanding of how you would go about trying to do an additional designation of new center versus the existing center that we already have, which is already designated. The update to the framework won't change that immediately. We have some things that we would need to do in updating our downtown plan and things like that to continue to maintain that.
At the Peach County Regional Council that I attend, there's a lot of discussion about the new criteria more than we can answer these two questions. That's more than, and there's a lot of pushback from Pierce County against having any kind of tiering, even a de facto tiering, saying, it's a class 1 growth center and a class 2 and a class 3, even though they don't know for sure that would influence the funding decisions. They just don't want that kind of discrimination. And so that's the thing that may be a little more pressing for us, is whether we don't like the criteria that are coming up. And it's in your committee of growth management that all this is going to finally come out. Do you have any idea of how soon it's going to come out?
first of next year is my best guess. But first, the good news coming out of PSRC's Growth Management Policy Board is the question and option of tiering is out the window. We have dismissed that as being too divisive. So that's gone. I have the current draft, which I'll share with you offline. It's just in my working file, but it contains more red line proposals than black ink at this time. So it's still in the mix. I guess we could complicate it even further. Shall we discuss center's designation for military bases and Indian reservations?
Is Indian reservations on the list?
I think they have a future work item to look at whether that should be, whether they should somehow be addressed in the regional centers framework. In terms of military, there's a lot of interest from Pierce and Kitsap counties in particular in having large military installations basically treated on par with the regional center. And I think that's one thing that the SCA caucus has sort of pushed back on a bit in terms of that they're not the same as a regional growth center. They're not allocated growth and accommodating growth in the manner that in the way that cities have to invest in their centers. But they obviously have an important and large impact on surrounding communities, and they're important to our community. So there's been a lot of discussion about, okay, how do we fit that into the discussion, but not maybe treat them as though they're the exact same thing when they're just not.
Well, I don't think this group is going to be able to gin up a response letter to the new criteria, but I would trust Jeff and Ingrid to put together such a letter, just outlining some of our things we like, things we don't like about the red line draft so far. And then we can get at those two questions later next year. John?
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill hasn't spoken yet.
I think we have a lot of excellent elements in our city area. We have Boeing, we have other aerospace work being done, manufacturing in the city of Auburn. We got a rail. Man, do we have rail. Port of facilities, we're between two ports. We have major highways, Highway 18, 167, I-5. I mean, we're ready to bust out. And maybe what we need, Mayor, is this as an agenda item and at our retreat, you know, put some time for discussion.
In answer to Bill's comment, he's absolutely correct. We already qualify, if we were to apply, as a MIC. We draw a line around, we're already meet that definition. The question is it worth to us to apply? Is it worth us to designate an area as a MIC? It may not be because of all the strings that are attached to it. It may not bring us anything, but it may obligate us to a lot of microscope work. Now, as far as the draft is concerned, I did share that with Kevin and Ingrid and Jeff. It's in the hands of staff right now. I just happen to have my working copy on my desk that I'm working with. I'd be happy to share with you or anyone else that wants to, but outside of an engineer, it's pretty boring reading.
Is there consensus, though, that we ought to ask our professionals to write something to the PSRC Growth Management Committee? I think it's really what it ought to, wouldn't it? If you guys are putting together the thing?
The date for comment has passed, but I could certainly take it in.
So, yeah, so the public comment period for the draft framework is over, and we as staff did provide some minor comments in that process.
Okay, so you already did.
But we do work with Councilmember Holman as he's going through the discussion at the Growth Management Policy Board to help answer any questions that he might have or concerns or issues
That
that you
sounds
might
good
have.
to me.
The reality is, they hold my hand and tell me, give me all the information that I don't have the skills to take forward.
Okay, is that all for this agenda item? Go ahead into 15 minutes. That was close.
Thanks for coming, Brian, it's much appreciated.
Okay, Ingrid's gonna do the capital projects status report.
I'm going to bring up a couple other people.
So, Rich,
Yes,
were we going to bring this back to a study session, I mean, to the retreat?
So the workshop that we're going to have is a budget workshop. And then we'll have a retreat later in the year with a lot of different topics on it. The next,
This will be one of them to be on there, because I
You're asking
feel
for that to be on there, yeah.
I feel that it would be really beneficial.
okay.
All right. So we also have our capital projects report and kind of a 2017 year-end summary. So in your agenda packet, there is a brief list where we tried to give you some of the numbers of what we've actually accomplished this year.
I guess if there's questions.
So if there are questions about any of that, but it's a fairly hefty amount of work that has been done this year. Just some highlights from that: reconstructing over 30 lane miles of new pavement throughout the city. So remember all the construction this year, that's what that was. As well as several miles of utility improvements along with that, and nearly 4 miles of new and or replaced sidewalks. So a lot of work has gone into this year. So with that, I'll go through anything specific.
Well, no, if you guys want to go page by page on this?
Yes. So on page 16, 138, any questions on those projects? The Auburn Way South Corridor, 277.
And awfully small.
All the way north.
They should have printed it bigger.
Okay, I guess we can go to the next page then. That's water meter billing and 22nd Street and High Street roundabout. The 30th Street storm improvements and the M&O building roof retrofit.
I think that would be the third page.
and that's the third
Yeah, what page are you on?
page. Second page
Oh.
has Fulmer Wellfield.
Oh, I didn't, yeah, it's on the backside of it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't have any questions on that page, but I do on the water billing.
Okay,
Well, real quick, on the last one on that page, 1502, typically I like to put when the work is expected to resume, and it wasn't on this one. So the 37th and 8th traffic signal, that's going to resume work in February. They're in suspension right now for material procurement.
so are we okay on page 17? All right, page 18 that I had jumped ahead to. Questions, Bill?
Yeah. The CP 1317, the water billing system improvements. I had a neighbor come up to me last week, and he said, hey, I got notified by the city of Auburn that I have a water leak. And Claude, it was Aldo's Torino, and who's my neighbor. And so I have the same system. You can't read, I mean, you don't have a dial anymore to see if it's moving for a water leak, so you have to rely on the system to tell you. So the system told him that he had a water leak. But in talking with him, he wasn't sure if it was in his house or in the property leading out to the water meter. So I talked to Ingrid at Fred Meyer's yesterday, in fact. And so I called down and I talked to the billing area of utilities. And they told me that, yeah, the system will tell you and will give you a forewarning, and they'll come out and check, not in the house area, but from the house to the meter area and to see, and so it sounds like a good system. The only thing, you can't go out and do your own leakage detection like you used to be able to with the dial.
But you'll be able to do it online.
Well,
Yes.
oh, yeah,
It's quicker.
eventually, yeah, that's coming, right?
In 2018, the customer service side of this, once we actually have everything up and running, will include a customer service portal where they can actually go in and look at their usage more directly. And
But they won't be able to answer the question that this guy had. Is it in my line from the meter to the house or the line from the main to
correct,
the meter?
and there's nothing there that we can do to respond to that, other than to say that, yes, there's a leak at the meter because it's running water.
So it's something to be aware of.
Yes,
So we will be able to follow our water meter through line? Because I know I received a $700 bill, and we found out that it was our sprinkler, one of our sprinkler heads was leaking. We got that taken care of.
Yeah, so the way the system works is we've set up some parameters for when a particular service line has more water being used than what is expected. It will actually send an alarm to our staff to take a look at the account and see if we can figure out what's going on, which may then generate staff going out and looking at it to see, are we seeing a water leak usage, or is it that they have their sprinkler system running? So there's an investigation that kind of goes along with that, and then notice goes out to the resident if we believe it's a leak on their side of the system. So the customer service portal will give the resident the ability to go in and look at their actual water usage, and we get that reading from the AMI meters pretty consistently, like about every 4 hours throughout the day. So you'll be able to see that spike in usage versus what you see right now when you look at our customer service portal. You see the reading that happens every 2 months, right? So you're going to get much more regular and frequent information. But it's not going to answer the question of where the leak is.
Does this save meter reading?
Yes, so, yes, so that we have staff that typically went out and read all the meters. With AMI, that's all happening electronically, so that we're not having to go out and read the meters. We still go out, though, and troubleshoot when we find out if there's a leak or we get an alarm notification or tampering with the meter. We still go out and we investigate those situations.
Plus, if you get a larger bill, if you look at last year, oh my God, this has gone up. Our bill this last time only went up $25, so that's not a big deal. But if it goes up several $100s, then you better call the city and make an inquiry.
Just remember, this last summer was a really long, dry summer as well, so there was a lot more water usage because of that.
So can you walk us through the investigative process of how that occurs and how the determination of the leak is made, owner or city?
So I think that's probably a longer conversation than this intent is, and I don't know that I have all of the detail of that to be able to answer all those questions.
It would be good for us to understand what the process is as well.
I think you might want to have a study session on the water system in general. You know, it's expensive, and people can't understand why it's so expensive. We need to understand why it's so
I
expensive.
think that's excellent, really, because we, you know, if we didn't do if the region didn't do what they do to keep the water clean, I mean, we could have a lot of diseases out there that we wouldn't want. So, no, it's worth the dollar. And
So sometime next quarter, maybe you can add the deputy mayor, and specifically, we want to know some of the details of how things actually work.
I agree. I called immediately when I got that because I was shocked. And you guys go, well, you have a swimming pool, yes. Well, it's been a warmer season, yes, so.
Yeah, I mean, our utility billing staff handles a lot of those calls and deals with that. They're basically the first response for that type of situation. They'll put in a work order to our meter reader staff to go out and do some investigation work through our water department.
Anything more on page 18? Okay, let's go to page 19. Questions? Okay, let's go to page 20.
On page 20, we have the Auburn Way South dynamic message sign, and it is the first one that is installed in the city. And we just brought a picture to show you what it looks like if you haven't seen it.
It's great.
They're great communication tools, and we're very excited about its future use. So, and
How
then
many are we gonna get for 180,000?
One.
What you see.
What?
What you see.
One?
So you have another one just like that on 277th here shortly.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, so we're gonna get two.
So this particular project is just funding the Auburn
Yeah,
Way
yeah.
South. The other one is within the 277th Street project budget, so the 190 is just for this location. And that's just simply what it takes to get power and all the equipment and foundations and connectivity to our system, because we actually control this from our traffic management center.
Okay,
Chair,
Bill.
could we go back? I missed one. This print is so small. I don't know. Page 19, the last item on it, South Hangar Row 3 door improvement. In the status, Ingrid said we're going to resume on December the 4th.
They're actually going to start on December 13th.
Okay, all right.
So it's,
Good.
wasn't updated. I updated after this was printed.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, we're still on page 21, I guess, aren't we?
No, Claude has that.
Pardon? Yeah, Claude?
Just a comment on page 20. First of all, just driving up the hill and seeing that was just very impressive. And just a thank you for doing 37th and I Street work. I pass it every day. And I have definitely seen an improvement in what's happening in that intersection from the work that's already been done. You know, this is just gonna take it to the next level, but I'm hearing a lot of good comments about the work that's being done there, so thank you.
Okay, now page 21. Okay, let's go to page 22. All right, nothing on 22, page 23. On CP 1705, the Auburn South sidewalk improvements, those seem like a lot wider sidewalks than we put anywhere else. Is that part of a requirement by the state or the feds, or are we just deciding we want wider ones?
So, are you talking about the new sidewalks up by the casino?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's actually part of CP 1218, which is a different project. But those are put in per the standard for arterial, which would be the 10-foot. And then we match the existing on either side. For this project, we're putting in the sidewalks along the north side of Auburn Way South, further down the hill.
Yeah, okay.
And they won't be 10-foot sidewalks. They'll be a little bit narrower to match the area that we have before we go over the hillside. So we don't have to build significant walls all along the section.
There's a lot of foot traffic up and down there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Anything else on page 23? All right, page 24 is the last page. Bill?
Page 18. I missed one.
Okay.
I missed one. The second item down. And we have two council members over there that use that street, 22nd and I, every day. So I'm just asking you guys, how's it going? A lot of citizens were concerned about the roundabout, But I think they're feeling more comfortable now, aren't they?
I haven't driven it recently, but I'll be driving it on Wednesday morning, so I can let you know.
Oh, you don't?
I
go
do,
down?
but I haven't, this week I haven't gone up that way yet, so I was working to start.
Oh, you go the other, okay, I follow you.
So
I've had a lot of questions from the people at some of the meetings we've had at the clubhouse with some of the citizens or residents there at the river. And I shared with many of them the information that Ingrid had given to me electronically. And that seems to have
Good.
pacified their concerns.
Just keep in mind, we're at the beginning phases of construction, so there's no roundabout there yet. They're just starting the utility work.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's a couple of trucks out there working, sucking stuff out of the ground, but when do we actually expect the construction to start?
Yeah, they're doing potholing for some utility right now. That's what the sucking out of the ground is, and they're gonna start the storm drainage work here in the next couple days, so that's the first utility work that you're gonna see of the significant progress on the project. Right now, it's just been more exploratory type, or explorations within the area, so more significant work here in the next couple days.
Bud, you're next.
Bill, just go back to your question on me, driving that very frequently. We do see a lot of near misses. People just really get confused of who goes when and where and what on that. And I just think, just visioning the roundabout there as I'm driving through there is going to make that traffic move so much smoother through that area. And I think that also has somewhat satisfied our fellow residents over the river, knowing that how the traffic patterns will actually work once that's in place.
Right.
When is the completion of Dogwood and Auburn Way South going to be completed? There's a piece of sidewalk that's not done, and then that big light post, are you going to set that back? Because it looks right now like it's right in the middle.
So, yeah, so there's still signal work that needs to be done at both Riverwalk and the Dogwood intersection. And I talked about at the last time that we did this, that we had some delays on signal material that came out of all the disasters that happened down south. So they are just getting back to working on the signals this last week, so, and you probably drove through some of that construction this morning. So it is underway. It will take time. We can't do the final overlay of that roadway until next spring. So the goal is to get all of that signal work completed, finishing all those corners up.
Well, that's going to be really nice once it's completed. It's nice as it is right now, but, and you drive up there all the time, so it'd be nice to see that corner completed too.
Tonight I went around by 29th to try to beat the backup. Bill?
I would just like to say again, I've said it before about this, this is one heck of a great report for citizens, and it's online. And I know that when I go down to the senior center for our one-on-one, and this week I'll take another copy down, but I take it down there, and it has really cut out a lot of the questioning of what's going on in town. So, super report, really is. And it gives us a big tool to use when we're out and about. Because what I've done is I've shrunk this down to half my wallet. You can't shrink that much further.
When you go to the senior center, you're gonna make the print bigger.
I'm just kidding.
Since Bill started doing that, I started doing that as well. And the people there just thank us to have those materials available for them, and they don't have that many questions after all. Thank you.
And I want to congratulate, we're talking about the report, congratulate you. After doing this for 5 years, you still keep those status things nice and crisp.
It's actually these guys that are doing that
Yeah,
now?
Mr. Desmond is doing a great job of keeping them crisp. There's a tendency to want to write the whole engineering report there, and these are working good. I do have, I want to comment, I think when we were talking about the High Street roundabout last time, I suggested there needs to be a one-pager handout for people in those neighborhoods that outlines some of the advantages that they may not think about. And that one, for instance, that I always think about is how much slower you're going on a roundabout versus an intersection, and so you're not going to kill people. You know, it just, and so there's a bunch of advantages like that that I think we ought to have easily handleable to people.
And and I understand that, and as we get a little closer to actually having that roundabout done and constructed, we would be looking at doing some education in that neighborhood area with the residents as well.
Yeah, because they grumble about having to learn how to do it. Well, there's good reasons for learning how to do it. You just got to tell them. Okay, I guess we're done with the capital projects report. And it took a lot longer than 10 minutes.
Now, can't you control that?
So too, yeah. Okay, resolution 523, or 5323. Is you again?
It's me and James as well.
Yeah.
James Weber, traffic engineer. So this is some housekeeping for the 497 shuttle. We, in September of 2017, Sound Transit added additional train to both the AM and the PM peak direction of travel. And so what we've negotiated with King County and Pierce County is an update to the agreement to provide additional shuttle service to meet that additional train. So that's what is in here. If you want to go through any other details on that.
No, I mean, this is the fourth time we will have amended the original agreement. Previous amendments have been just to extend the original agreement. This one will add those additional trips to the 497 shuttle to Lakeland Hills. The lack of parking close to the station, the density we have in Lakeland Hills, that is a very popular shuttle route. We've been hearing from the neighbors about how busy that is and how it's standing room only, and the need to add additional trips to meet those additional trains to try and spread that load out through more buses.
And you'll see in the agenda bill, I think I added what the ridership was for 2016. We were at about a little over 67,000 boardings per year. And so far this year through October, we were at over 65,000. So we will exceed last year this year. And that has been the continuous trend with the Route 497, is that ridership continues to increase.
I wonder if we couldn't do it ourselves for less than $180,000.
So remember that we're only paying 1/3 of the cost.
Yeah, but that's still $180,000.
But that's including all the staff time for the bus drivers, as well as all of the buses to meet the trip requirements.
But
So
if you had one driver, this is a kind of an 8-hour service, isn't it? It's going to cost you about $50,000 a year. So I'm still thinking it's worth looking at. The tribe has decided to do it. And I think that it apparently isn't such a terrible expense for them, and so I think we ought to think about that before we go another time. I'm for doing this now, because it's working so well. But I think before this comes around again, you ought to take a week and think about whether it would be better to do it ourselves. Bill?
Well, I have an ingenious idea. You know, since you're going to have so much time on your hands, you know where I'm leading this?
Do I tap into that $180,000?
There's a job for you.
Do you really want Leadfoot?
But you would have to get a commercial driver's license.
He could do it.
Okay, any other questions on Resolution 53?
Yes, I do, and this is a serious one. Okay, so you show the increased cost for 2018 and 2016. I didn't see anything in there on 2017. I must have missed it. So can you tell me about that? It was
So-
yeah.
So the increase is from 2017 to 2018, so we're going from about 156,000 a year to 179.
What page are you on?
It's on page 31 of 138 in the table there. This is all based upon the actual operating hours and the cost per hour, not only for the personnel, but also for the maintenance of the transit buses and all of the drive time that they do.
Maybe it's the 2016 and 2017 that I...
Well, there would not be an increase in cost for 2017
Oh,
because the
then-
extra trips will not start until
Okay,
January.
That's why it's not here. Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions on that resolution, thank you. So now we move to resolution 5335, skateboard.
This is the mayor's cue.
Sure.
So this is just skateboard, as some of you may know, and Bill talked about it actually at the council meeting last Monday during council reports, that the interlocal agreement with skateboard that the city of Auburn will be signing had some language in there that would allow for non-regional transit authority cities to have say in sound transit related issues. Not that skateboard has that many RTA issues that come up, but it just didn't feel right to me that a city outside of the RTA would have an influence on skateboard's position on RTA related items. And so Bill and I chatted about it. I've been working with Chris Arkell, and he has talked with the chairs of the skateboard, who are both non-RTA cities, and they are okay with changing the language that RTA cities will vote on RTA-related items with the recommendation that they seek the input from those surrounding cities. So that'll have to go back. King County Council has not reported or has not approved the ILA yet because Councilmember Balducci had some issues with one of the other regional transit or regional, it's not skateboard, but it's in the north or on the east side. And so there was some language that had some concerns. So King County Council won't be taking this up until January, I believe. And
yep.
skateboard will be bringing it back to
Next
your
week.
to your meeting next week for December to discuss the amendment. So to me, it just didn't feel right that a city that and their residents that weren't paying into RTA and have the benefit of it were having a say in what the cities and residents that do pay into RTA.
Is Covington part of the?
No, they're not.
skateboard?
Yes, they are part of skateboard,
And aren't
but they are
outside?
not an RTA
Okay.
city.
All right, so there's another one of these that would apply to.
Right, Enumclaw, Maple Valley,
Black
Black Diamond, Covington.
That's it.
Is that it?
Makes sense.
Yep.
Any other comments on resolution 5335?
It'll be coming back.
You're speeding through these, you could probably sneak in another one. Just keep up the pace.
Okay, one more before we take a break. So now we're doing 118th. Now this one is one where we want to be careful on TV that we don't say anything that might be sensitive. Because, you know, whenever you talk about roads and perceived safety, we don't need to be making semi-professional judgments about that on TV. But we do want the professional to give us an update on what's happening there.
So 118th Avenue Southeast, the stretch of this roadway that we're talking about here is the stretch of 118th that is north of 304th. Continues north and actually dead ends before reaching the north end of the city limits, and also has a portion that fronts on the area that is actually the city of Kent called the Bridges. Orients everybody. History, King County originally built the roadway. The roadway was a dead-end road until about 2008 when the Bridges development opened up and made an additional connection into the northern end of that roadway. And that was done under permits that were issued by King County and by the city of Kent. This was prior to it being annexed to the city, so it wasn't done under any of City of Auburn's regulatory authority. We did annex it in 2008. The roadway classification for it is it's a residential collector from 304th to about 302nd. It's currently classified as a local residential from 302nd up to 296th. However, because of the change in the nature with the bridges connecting in there, that really should be reclassified to a residential collector because that is how it is acting and collecting the traffic that comes from the bridges development and connects into the city of Auburn. Some history about the roadway. So since 2008, when it became a city road, we've had a total of 3 crashes on that roadway. 2 of them involved single vehicle crashes. They were not necessarily related to other issues on the roadway, other than they had probably some other influences, personal influences in how those crashes came about. None of them involved pedestrians or bicycles on that roadway. The current roadway pavement condition is between an 82 and a 95, so it's in fairly good shape. It's not necessarily a candidate for preservation work at this point. And the City of Auburn receives complaints regarding speeding and street racing on that pretty regularly from the residents that are up there and those that use that roadway. So in August of this year, we received a petition from some of the residents up there asking us to regrade a portion of the road about 500 feet. That request came from about 18 of the 34 properties that actually access 118th. It also included about 29 signatures from City of Kent residents within the Bridges development. So things that we've done along this roadway to try to address the concerns of speeding and street racing from the residents in the area, we have added additional signage and continue to look at different ways of trying to address the situation, given that it is more of a collector type roadway. So we have dropped the speed limit when we took it over to a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit for the roadway. We also have 20-mile-per-hour warning signs where it's appropriate. You can see in the lower corner there we have the 20-mile-per-hour for hill blocks view. We also have added additional pavement markings on the roadway, so we've striped 25 miles per hour. We've also striped rumble strips, which you can see in the lower picture there, again trying to draw attention to the drivers to try to drive the appropriate speed down that roadway. We've also added a radar speed sign to the southbound direction, and we are working on adding one to the northbound direction, again, so that residents and those that use the roadway, their attention is drawn to what the speed limit should be and what they should be driving as they go down that roadway.
Are there no passing signs there?
You don't, it's striped with a double yellow, and therefore it doesn't need to be signed as no passing, because that stripe actually indicates that.
There could be so many varieties of centerline markings anymore that I can hardly keep track of them, so I'm wondering if a sign might be appropriate.
When you get your bus license, they'll bring you up to speed on all those things.
The concern with putting signage up when you have striping such as this is that then you have the issue of when you don't have the sign, is what should the driver know? So the driver has a responsibility to understand what the striping of the roadway means and when no passing is allowed, so that we don't have to sign everywhere. Otherwise, I would have to put up a sign about every 5 feet telling everybody everything that's in the code. So, and that's not realistic.
What is, I'm sorry, but I can't see that little sign. What does it say
This-
there? Yeah, what does it say?
So this says hill blocks view and a suggested speed of 20 miles per hour. Okay. So additional things that we've done, we continue to work with police on enforcement up there, and I got some statistics from our police staff. Between September of 2014 and August of 2017, they had 84 traffic infractions, 16 criminal traffic infractions. It's known as an enforcement area for them. They are well aware of that. They've done 13 emphasis patrols between January and August of this year alone. Between 304th and 298th, they issued 9 infractions and 4 warnings during that time period. To give you an example, for all of 118th, that stretch, they issued 32 infractions, compared to over on 124th, they issued 784 infractions during that time frame. So they are out there regularly looking at it and trying to enforce traffic.
Cool.
Is the 124th, is that by the school?
Yeah.
Oh, and that's, yeah, big emphasis.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Bob?
Quick question, Ingrid, are we strongly considering doing any of the roadway improvements that have been recommended by the petition?
So I'll continue on to the next slide.
There you go, Bob.
So the staff have addressed the recent concerns, again, with the 25 miles per hour. It addresses if those that are using the roadway are driving appropriately down the roadway, there is not an issue with the road per se. In order for us to address the grading that is referenced in the petition, we would have to reconstruct a little over 400 feet of the roadway. We would have to construct retaining walls along either side of the roadway because of the hills that exist there, as well as reconstruct 7 or more private driveways. That cost alone is about $842,000. That doesn't widen the road, that doesn't add any sidewalks, that doesn't address any drainage, that doesn't add any curb and gutter, that doesn't add any lighting. That is just to drop the roadway. So it's a fairly significant cost for something that has already been addressed through, again, the treatments that we have done out there and through the regulatory speed that is set for the roadway.
Ingrid, are the walls, the retaining walls, are those due to the wetlands that are along the side, or is that?
So the way that the road is, basically when they built it with King County, they laid it on what the existing ground was. So you have hills that go through there. When you lower that down, you still have hills that continue beyond the roadway. So you have to build a retaining wall in order to hold up the rest of that hill.
So explain the retaining wall, please.
So when you're regrading a road and you're getting rid of a hill that exists in it, right? So you're lowering that down. Outside of the roadway prism itself, that hill still exists. So as you cut down the roadway, you have to build a retaining wall to hold back that hillside on either side of the road.
Or take away somebody's front yard.
Or regrade throughout there. Again, a lot of the costs are in the regrading that has to be done in order to maintain the access that exists through this stretch of roadway.
One of the areas that I think you need to list in your presentation is this is a feeder area for 3 schools. For Auburn Mountain View High School, kids walk from Rainier and from Hazelwood. And the bridges portion has sidewalks, but the rest of this.
So when the bridges development was allowed to develop up there, King County required that they actually build a pedestrian path from the bridges development down to 304th. So that pathway does exist and is separated by a curb from the travel lane.
Yeah. Marginally.
Any other questions on this item?
I wasn't quite done.
Okay.
So you asked whether we would want to do reconstruction. If that's something that the council wants to consider, I wanted to go through what are your options for funding something like that at $842,000. It's not eligible for the preservation funds because the road is in good condition. It's not eligible for traffic impact fees because this is not a capacity improvement project. So the options that you have is really a local improvement district where the residents would pay for the cost of lowering the road themselves. In order for that to trigger and actually show the benefit for an LID to be applied, this would most likely require that it start to include curb and gutter, sidewalk, lighting, all of the other things that would benefit the property owners.
Sure.
You have the 102 arterial street funds. However, there's not a whole lot of money in 2018 that is not already allocated to other grant projects, so anything that we would reduce would be safety projects and would not cover the full cost of the $842,000. The other option is we have the street reserve fund that was just recently created through the ad hoc committee process, but this would deplete that completely. So those are kind of what the options are. Our proposed next step, continue to do the police emphasis with patrols and speed enforcement. We continue to monitor the incidents and speeds that we're seeing up there, and we continue to evaluate the effectiveness of the traffic calming measures that we've already implemented and that we continue to implement.
So, oh, I'm sorry. So tell, Mike, can you speak to the enforcement, what you guys do up there? Do you go up there daily and stage yourself somewhere, or behind a tree or, you know.
They can't do that.
We're not going to reveal exactly
Don't
where we
give
hide.
away.
But yeah, well, I can tell you this, I can tell you that I hear them up there running frequently, and I will say almost every day, but it is very frequent that I hear them up there running radar and stopping cars and giving warnings and giving citations, and the numbers came out.
Because it's probably the neighbors, right, that are doing the speeding.
Oftentimes, those who complain are those who are speeding.
Yeah.
And up on 124th, they also travel down the hill up into Kent as well.
Not your experience too? As a former cop?
I'm just saying $850,000 won't fix stupid.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you go back to that slide that has the options? So how would the LID work?
So a local improvement district is something that the residents can choose to do. The city can also choose to try to enforce it. However, it still needs about 60% support from the residents in order for it to go forward. And basically, what an LID is we set up a project where we go build the improvements and then basically charge the residents to pay for those costs. And they also pay the additional markup cost that's necessary for handling the funding mechanism for doing that over time. It's about 10 years for paying.
So
that
would
back.
you divide the cost of the road from all the neighboring?
You would divide it among the various properties that are benefiting from it. So so you'd have to look at how that benefit is determined. So is it the frontage of the property? Is it the area of the property? It depends upon what the improvements are that you're doing as to how you calculate what that benefit is to each individual parcel. But that would be part of going through an assessment process and creating the assessment roll and the cost valuation for it, which is why I say in order for us to show that there is a benefit to the properties, you're probably looking at doing more of a full street improvement, so curb gutter, sidewalk, lighting, all of that, in order for them to show that there is benefit to their property for doing that improvement.
You said that there's a 60% payment by, I thought it was 100% payment.
It's 100% payment, 60% support from the residents. So if you don't have 60% support, they can stop the LID.
Well, you would think that it would be beneficial for the neighbors because they would be getting a sidewalk, drainage, lighting that they
That's
don't
extra.
have now.
That's extra.
All
Oh,
extra.
that's extra?
Extra.
Oh, okay. Back up.
So,
Yeah, so that was not included in the number, and I'm just gonna jump back to the map here. So the area we're talking about, the 500 feet is not quite the whole area that's shown in the kind of the orange color there.
Okay.
So an LID would not apply to everybody on the entire corridor. It would apply to those residents immediately adjacent to the roadway, typically. And so you're spreading that cost over what might be a dozen homes and not the 34 homes that exist on the roadway. So
I ran
it's a
an
fairly spendy cost.
I ran an LID in my rural neighborhood out in Auburn years ago, and there was a zone termini approach that lets you charge the people at the end of the road on some prorated basis compared to the people down at the other end. You know, kind of how much of the road do you use? And that's the way we ran the one out there for 40 people, so that it didn't end up with just a few people paying. But it's still really expensive, you know. I would bet that some of those assessments would be over $30,000 to do this $1 million project at least. Yes.
Most of the people that live on that 118th are seniors.
Yeah.
But I can't see from here, but the road that's in the bridges that runs parallel to 118th, that one, and the one that doglegs off of it, they don't have any houses yet. And the one that goes into it at 90 degrees, 118th, up there from the bridges, is where all the kids hang out. I think that once we get homeowners there and the kids are not congregating there during the school day and after the school day from the high school, because I don't think the middle school kids are driving yet. that some of those others, they are not residents, that some of that should go away when it's filled with homes, which is going to be shortly.
Okay, Claude.
Can you go back to where we are and looking at the continuing measures for this? So the next steps, yeah. So when should we receive some sort of update on this, and what should that include?
So this is not a new issue. This has been an ongoing issue for many years on 118th because of the configuration of the roadway. So we continue to look at what we have done, whether it's working. Are there other changes we can make? We've made several changes this year alone to try to address it a little bit better. So I don't know that we have a specific time frame for coming back to council with it, because it really depends upon whether we see anything else that needs to be done out there. A lot of this gets funded out of our traffic calming program, and so if we see something that we need to do or we think we might need to do, we can just program that in.
So can we at least maybe look at this just for now, kind of schedule on a quarterly basis, just as an update? And then if there's measures that are taking place, saying that you feel have addressed the issue significantly or enough, and we can back off of that, but at least to keep us informed as your steps go forward.
And my only concern with quarterly was that might be too frequent for me to give you any new information, so every 6 months or something might be more appropriate.
That's just a suggestion, so, yeah.
Okay, so I think we're done with that one, but let's take a 7-minute break.
That's it.
I can see him in a little hat. Can
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
You can.
Doesn't have any design.
Popcorn.
For everything that we've talked about.
So if you guys are meeting in the lobby, the front, my records clerks, see him get up. Oh. I'm sitting up there waiting.
Yes, I do.
You guys are the ones that ain't done yet.
Okay, let's start up
You didn't have
again.
any?
No.
And it's Development Regulations number 2 from Jeff and Ingrid. The type font is a little bigger, but maybe we get a squint a little bit.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jeff Tate, Assistant Director of Community Development. This item, tonight's agenda is a round 2 discussion for development regulation amendments. And I thought that it would be helpful to just pass out a real quick kind of organizational piece to help council and others understand some of the authorities just in terms of code implementation, code updates, and then how we're involved in development review. Ingrid and I live this every day, so we probably take it as for granted and second nature. But as we talk about code updates and we talk about really customer service dilemmas going back a couple of weeks ago, when we talk about development review procedures, Ingrid and I and our teams work side by side as we update code and implement code and review projects. So I thought that might be a useful piece to have at your side while we're talking about this, and to maybe take it and file it away and keep it handy when we're having some other conversations as well. In your packet, it's really a follow-up. Back on May 8th, staff came before City Council and talked about a package of potential development regulation amendments. And Mayor Backus had asked staff to start looking at areas of code that really don't fall in the category of development standard overhauls. It's really like looking at where are the areas that staff gets frustrated or the customer gets frustrated, and that might be easy wins to work through on our processes and some of our standards. So when we came before council on May 8th, we provided a matrix and a list, which was kind of a to-do list. And what's in your packet right here is a matrix. It's a more elaborate matrix, but it provides information about what each of those items were, where we're at, a status report of what actions have been taken, what's been accomplished. There's a few items that remain that are being worked on. And then it's really to start another conversation with council about a round 2. And really the idea of getting some momentum that once or twice a year coming before council and having a conversation about areas that we hear from customers that are frustrated. Maybe there's a lack of clarity in the city code, or we don't have a well-defined process about how we do something. And from a staff perspective, but really as we develop this kind of list, you hear from constituents as well, and want to make sure that we're making sure to touch base before moving forward. So I'm happy, and I think Ingrid and I are both happy to talk about what's in the update portion of the matrix as well as the round 2 portion. I know that it's been in your packet, so you've had a chance to look at it. So I don't, unless council wants me or us to go through line by line, I think we're happy to answer questions.
The only question I have is on the very first one, and on the column it says the city endorsement. As I recall, there wasn't unanimous endorsement of the first one, the density calculation. The rest there were. How does everybody else remember it? Nobody remembers it.
No. And I'm concerned about the second one.
So I think you maybe took a little bit more from what we talked about than we intended in saying that the council endorses some of these.
And I'll be clear on what what my takeaway was, is that there were no objections to staff looking at any of these items to take forward to Planning Commission. I don't recall any objections regarding the issue.
I objected to the number first one.
Back on May 8th?
Different recollection.
Yes, John.
On May 8th, the matrix that you presented us had 7 or 8 items on it. My recollection is we said go ahead with, I think, 6 of the 7.
That's kind of the way I remember it.
And there was only one that appeared to need to go through the Planning Commission. And of those 7, the first 3 have already been accomplished.
Well, has the first one been accomplished? How is it?
Well, they're not listed here at all. I'd have to go get my original matrix.
Oh, I'm talking about the first one here, on the.
Yeah, I realize the density calculation, but that wasn't on the original 7, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I objected to it is because it's a general planning philosophy of, do you want houses that are very close together, or do you want them farther apart? And I personally vote for farther apart, for fire reasons, for privacy reasons, for keeping pets reasons, for keeping chicken houses reasons. You know, there's a lot of reasons for wanting a little more room to be next to your neighbor. And so I think you need to, before this gets published, you need to at least change the heading on that column to say, because the way you phrased it just now, we endorsed looking into all these things.
Right.
We didn't endorse them as it sounds like they're endorsed to go into effect, and I don't believe that's what the council meant.
No, and we can clarify what that column heading is, but what it's intended to mean is there was an endorsement of council for that initial list on May 8th to evaluate and look into further each of those items.
And
Some
that isn't said here, so you need to
What's
say
that?
that.
Yeah, I mean, we can
Say
change
to
what the
look into it,
column
'cause
is.
I'm willing to look into the density thing, but my first reaction is it puts houses closer together and brings all those problems I just mentioned.
Yeah. And the list that's here is the list from May 8th, just to be clear, except I did add in one item which came up right at the time that we had presented the May 8th list, which is the final plat amendment procedural change the council adopted. So I added that into this matrix because it does reflect an action, and it wasn't in the original matrix.
Well, I think most of the rest of these, your title is probably okay, because I think we all did think they were reasonable improvements. But the density thing has broad implications, and, you know, there's 2 or 3 of them. So I think you need to, at least on that one, say, we endorse looking at it.
Yeah.
But tell us the pros and cons.
Yeah.
John?
I do have a comment, but Largo hasn't spoken yet. And she,
Okay, under the second one, where we're talking about commercial driveways, that's the issue, and what you're proposing is below it, establish an administrative option?
That is what City Council approved on July 17th.
Great, that's my understanding too. Okay, thank you. Okay.
John?
And we've also been struggling with affordable housing. And a population of a city of 80,000 people, which we're going to hit next year. And so if I require you to have wider separation of houses, that comes at a cost.
Right, that's why I want
And
the
so
pros and
now
cons
we
list, you
become
know,
a city
that's
that
one
you
of the
can't
pros.
afford to live in.
And there's a pro on the side of land that can absorb water, you know, that you so anyway, you know, there's a pro and con list, and that's what I think I was asking you to come back with, even though I probably won't be here to listen to it.
I'm sure you will. Listen to it.
And I live right next door to the bridges, and they're practically on each other's front porch. And the people who live there love it. So I'm a proponent of being able to have mixed for those who want a little bit bigger yard for their dogs and those who are chickens, but providing options for people that don't want any yard and want to live closer, but they don't want to be in a condo or an apartment. So I'm supporting mixed.
I will point out that item J on the agenda tonight is the Planning Commission's recommendation on this very subject, so we will have an opportunity to dive into it.
All right, so how do we want to go through this? Do you want to go through it line by line, or do you kind of accept my comment that we all agreed to everything except the one with density at the last time? Or not on the stage 2 ones, did we? We didn't talk about the stage 2 ones?
Well, I mean,
Round two.
yeah, I mean, I really wanted to put this out there so that council had an understanding of status of the items that were discussed on May 8th. So we can, I don't think they all need to be gone through line by line, because I think council's taken action on most of these already. Density and infill are something that shows as a draft ordinance that's on the agenda for later this evening. And then there's a couple of engineering items. And then it's really seeking feedback on starting that next round.
So we should start maybe on page 86 then, and just go through the round 2 stuff?
You can do that. And I'll walk through each one of these real quick. So first of all, the first item, there's been a lot of confusion and frustration over the years about how the city manages its process and the permitting requirements for temporary job shacks and construction offices that are on site during construction and during leasing periods. We reached out to our customers, and they agree that it'd be a lot nicer to have a clean process and a very understandable set of permitting requirements. So that's one that does directly come back from the customer, and I'll tell you that staff gets frustrated too, because when you don't have a clean process, it leads to inconsistency as well.
Bill?
You know, this whole round 2, I looked at it, I thought, well, okay, there's the description and criteria, but what are the staff recommendations? I'm not an expert on this stuff. I mean, yeah, I can make a recommendation, but it may be all skewed and wrong. So I look for staff recommendations.
And
And it sounds like this,
Yeah.
sounds like the staff is saying they'd like to have a little bit clearer the definition as they try to enforce what's happening with these work
Yeah,
sites.
And I think one thing that I'd point you to is the far right column, where every one of these things requires time. Staff has to work on it, and we don't want to proceed down. We know that our job is to develop something and present a recommendation, but we don't want to move far down a path without having touched base with City Council and having worked on it, put staff energy into something, and perhaps have left something off a list, and council come back and say, well, I really would have liked it if you would have thought about this as well. So this is an early touch point. This is a discussion with council to get, I won't say a green flag or green light, maybe it's a yellow one, but it's something, some indication that these are good ideas to move forward to work on. And I know that you may look at some of these subjects and think, well, I don't know much about that because I haven't had to experience that as a customer. So I do get that it might be challenging to look at a list and say, like with a hard yes or a hard no without seeing what the recommendation is. But again, it's really more to make sure that we don't move forward on work product and make sure that council felt left out of that decision process from the beginning stages.
Bill?
So the planning commission hasn't seen this.
No.
To me, this should go to the planning commission, get their thoughts.
It will.
But before I bless this,
So the question tonight is not, do you bless the specific changes for each of these? It's, are you
Whether
good
the-
with these being the items that we focus on in 2018 to potentially look at making changes to? I think that's the main question.
I can't establish a priority on this because I don't know what is better or worse for a priority. I don't know about you guys, but
I don't think we're being asked to prioritize them 1, 2, 3 we're just supposed to say, do we agree with that little paragraph
Yeah.
as a work product for them next year? And I think I agree with the first one, but go ahead.
Yeah, I agree, and they may come up with some others, but we're supposed to set policy, and the policy is to start here and look at these. On the fence, though, I'd be interested in, why not 8? I mean, usually it's 6 or 8, and is it really all that important? So I'm really interested in what they have to say. The other one I'm really interested in is the landscaping one. We currently have an issue up there at Lakeland where some areas stuff was put in, and the city has notified the people that they need to return it to its original condition, which was dead plants, no water system, and whatever. So I'd like us to look for ways, and I know we're doing that in the future, where there's irrigation and stuff that deals with some of these. So I'd like to see what clarification comes up for this one.
Well, are there any of these things on this page 86 that you think are not worth planning and engineering's time next year?
I have a question first. So on the last one, on the SEPA.
1,000 hours.
Raising the SEPA threshold?
Pardon?
Raising the SEPA threshold?
Well, yeah, I just have a question on the SEPA because that one has the most extensive amount of hours devoted to it for reviewing it, I guess, right? Are we looking at something that's going to provide some substantial savings in the future? Or, and it will speed up the process, we do the kind of those exemptions, but what are the give and takes on this? What are the pluses and minuses, and perhaps giving us some direction there as you went through this so we know what the end result possibly could be?
And my suggestion would be that we dedicate a little bit of time at a study session just to talk about that, because the reason that the time commitment is so large is because in order to raise those categorical exemptions, we have to develop a new environmental review process that front loads some of the environmental review, and it invites in other agencies and partners to conduct review in advance of a project submittal. And there's pros and cons to that. It's like we talked with centers designation. There's strings attached to that. It's in the Washington Administrative Code as an option to raise your categorical exemptions, but it's not as simple as strike through and underline and then present it, and then it becomes code and it changes. That's why the labor commitment is so significant.
And I think for any of these like that, if we break these out into a separate study session to review it, get more in-depth and detail for the decision making at that time, but also it could be a point where we say, leave it alone. Let's not go there. So I think it's a good idea, like you're suggesting, Jeff, that we go forward with a briefing on something like this.
Again, the balance that we're trying to achieve is to make economic development move faster and be more efficient so that we're more attractive to development in our community. So let's not make it overly cumbersome. Then a follow-on to that is, Largo, I believe you and I were members of PCDC 6 years ago. And when we had the last SEPA, we looked into SEPA at depth. If I remember right, it took us over a year working on SEPA in PCDC. It's been a long time ago. So yeah, I can see the 1,000 hours for that, and actually having a separate council study session dedicated to working through SEPA, or at least presented it multiple times.
And I think the one thing that we'd like to inject into that conversation is looking back, say 5 years, if you raise those categorical exemptions from A to B, how many projects would it have affected?
Yes.
I mean, in the end, you could have looked at that and said, well, 7 projects would have benefited, or 47 projects would have benefited. And I think that's part of the conversation as well. As
number and size.
As I recall, some of the grumbles over the years about our threshold, it's been for small projects, like a remodel of a small business, and the guy has to do a SEPA because it's qualifies. And so maybe we would want to have in your presentation some thought about whether we can restrict, whether we can make the thresholds different for different kinds of projects and avoid the 1,000 hours.
And some of that does exist. I will point out that council did take a prior action several years ago to raise the categorical exemptions the easiest way to describe it, I guess, is there's the base of where the categorical exemption levels are. You could raise it up to a certain point before jumping into this 1,000-hour commitment,
Right.
which could then bring you up here. So the city did raise its categorical exemptions, and many projects have benefited from that. So it'll be important also to refresh council on what that action did, what it meant. Because a lot of those little projects, they don't trigger SEPA anymore. I mean, it is larger projects nowadays that trigger SEPA.
So, would you send us to refresh our minds on that? That's
Yeah. It's spelled out actually pretty nicely in the administrative code, so I can cut and paste that. And
It would
fine
also
tune it.
be nice for some of the new council members that are coming up on board and have only been here 2 years. My question, I have a question. Also, the same with Largo with the fence. So it says here the zoning code remains at 6 feet.
Yeah.
So are we going to talk about raising it up? I also agree the 8 feet would be, I would like to raise mine a little higher, so I won't be looking at my neighbors all the time.
Well, and so right now, for that particular issue, the state building code sets it at 7 feet. Not that you can't go above it, but once you go above 7 feet, it requires a building permit. So right now, our city code says 6 feet. We'd like to explore, without knowing the outcome, I'd like to explore taking the city code in the right locations of the code and bringing it up to 7 feet so it's consistent with the state building code, and then see what options there are above that.
Okay, next.
Well, so the second line down deals with, we have lots of different sections of city code that deal with fee assessment and collection, and they're all worded different, which becomes confusing for the customer. Some say fees are assessed at the time of application submittal, other times at permit issuance, that they need to be collected at permit issuance, or they need to be collected. So when you start looking at impact fees and system development charges and building permits and all those different areas of code where it talks about fees, the language is all different. So it's really about trying to clarify that and work to see if we can come up with something that's uniform throughout the code.
Well, I think it ended up like separate different kinds of things, because some were more exposure for us of doing work and not getting paid for it than were some others. And that's kind of what I think sorted them into those piles, you know. So but I agree, we sure ought to look at it, because I think the change we made on the recently where the guy didn't have to pay until occupancy was a big improvement.
Yeah.
And I think you'll look at that for all of them. I like that.
The third item is looking at the downtown urban center threshold standards for what triggers full compliance with the downtown urban center zone. It's a really low bar, 10%. If something exceeds 10% the valuation,